We are live, and
Great.
You can begin.
Great. So I'm going to share my screen now. And can you guys still hear me? Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, great. So thanks everyone for joining. This is a refresher of our principles. And it's been a while since we've gone through all these, so I just wanted to take some time, introduce the principles, what they are, why they are our principles, and how they manifest themselves in our product for some of the new people, new community members, and also the ambassadors. So any questions before we get started? Cool. So Status was started by Carl and Jared. The idea kicked off around 2016. The idea Status formulated into more of a tangible product in 2017 as a messenger, a wallet, and a Web3 browser built with Ethereum. But when they were kicking around the idea, the mission was always much bigger than that. It was much more than just a consumer product. We wanted to build secure communication tools and infrastructure for human rights. So it's very much a principles-driven, values-driven organization. And you can see that with the various products in the Status network. So we build products, including Status, Keycard, the Teller network, dApps, and Assemble. So these are all like consumer-facing products. And then we also have developer tools, Embark and Subspace, which are designed to help developers build these decentralized tools. The Status network contributes to low-level infrastructure. So Nimbus is the F2 project research initiative, bringing F2 and Ethereum to mobile phones and other resource-restricted devices. We work on VAC, which is a research division working on private messaging protocols. So they are the ones who built Waku, which is the replacement of Whisper and Status. And then also libp2p. So once again, these low-level infrastructure and protocols, infrastructure projects to just bring these decentralized tools to the people. And then at a community level, we have ambassadors. So a lot of the people in this call, everything we do is open source. Like our repos are all open, and everything we do is as a public good. And we conduct, like meetups and organizational groups and various, gatherings all over the world. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank God. Cool. So here you can just see a little visualization of what the Status network is. And today we're just going to go over, how the principles once again manifest themselves throughout this entire stack. Yep. So, so here, once again, we're going to focus on the principles. And here they are. Liberty, censorship resistance, security, privacy, transparency, openness, decentralization, inclusivity, continuance, and resourcefulness. And so what we're going to do today is just give like a brief introduction to these principles. Once again, why they are such an important piece of Status and how they manifest in the product. Each one of these realistically could include like an entire seminar. In fact, we did do that 2 years ago. And I can link everyone here to those seminars where the whole Status team or core contributors got on a call led by Oscar and went into detail on like the philosophies behind each one. And what came out of these seminars is what we call the wall of shame. And these are just, issues with our product or with our organization that we want to remedy in the long term. And I'll go into more detail on that at the end. So I will kick it off. I'll get started on liberty. Right. So liberty is, defined as we believe in the sovereignty of individuals. As a platform that stands for the cause of personal liberty, we aim to maximize social, political, and economic freedoms. This includes being coercion resistant. So here, I'm just going to talk briefly on the social, political, and economic concept of liberty. So at a practical level, once again, this means providing people with the right tools for their cultural experience And so I want to make sure sovereign for some of their lives as long as they don't harm others. And that's apparent in social liberty. And it's defined as like the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life or behavior. And this is kind of seen in, a good example of this is the suffragette movement, which is shown here on the right, in the US and Britain in the 19th and 20th century, in which women were coordinating and fighting for the right to vote. Or more so or just equally in the civil rights movement in the US, led by Dr. Martin Luther King, which was the decades-long struggle by African Americans to legalize racial discrimination and racial segregation. So I guess these are just clear cases in which people and groups of people are discriminated against by their social liberties and they're being marginalized. And status, we want to build the tools to help these people both in their coordination and in their long-term lives. We want to help them in their cause and also provide tools that carry into their life and help maintain their sovereignty. So those are some examples of social liberties which we're trying to protect. Political liberty, which is the liberty of citizens to participate in the political life and affairs of the state. And this is, there's fairly recent examples where these are being violated. So in Hong Kong, people are fighting for political freedoms, from mainland China. And these umbrella protests, which started in 2014, are driven by the desire for democracy, and ultimately fueled by opposition to a bill that would allow suspects to be sent from the city to mainland China to face trial. And during these protests, people were required to coordinate and communicate with various privacy-preserving tools. And those are the kind of tools that we want to make readily available for people, who are fighting for their political freedom, but are often met with great opposition. So we're trying to help these people in with technological tools. And it's also important to note here that Hong Kong is a really good example or a case in which people have economic liberty and they're able to trade, but they lack political freedom. So these three instances, social, political, and economic, are not always mutually inclusive. Another example is the Catalan referendum, where the people of Catalonia are fighting for political freedom and independence from Spain. And actually in 2017, they held an independence referendum, which was passed by the Parliament of Catalonia. However, it was declared unconstitutional and suspended by the Constitutional Court of Spain. And so they held this vote, and unfortunately, people in Catalonia, Catalonian residents, were blocked from voting by Spanish government. They intercepted ballots, they arrested Catalonian officials, and obviously there was a ton of violence that happened in the street as well. So these people fighting for their political independence and political freedom were met by a third party, an authoritarian third party. And once again, just like in Hong Kong, we want to provide these people with the tools to conduct votes, to fight censorship resistance, and to bring out personal autonomy. And then finally, on the topic of liberty, is economic. And this is the fundamental right of every human to control his or her own labor and property. And this is seen in, once again, modern examples is Venezuela. They have the highest inflation rate in the world, which makes access to basic human needs a challenge. The GDP has fallen more than 35% over the last 4 years, which is clouded in political oppression and corruption. The economy was heavily reliant on oil prices, and when oil prices plummeted, the country was left in poverty, extreme poverty. So in this case, Status aims to build tools not only for stability in places like Venezuela with these volatile economies, but to provide individual autonomy in regions marred by political and economic corruption, right? So in Venezuela, the government was highly corrupt, and it just impacted the autonomy of the people. And then the final example here is favelas in Brazil. And this is a slightly different type of example. So, favelas, these are like communities built without any government authority or planning. They were free to construct how they like. However, they typically have a reputation for violence and, illegal activity. But impromptu resourcefulness allows these favelas to operate as cities within a city. And there's actually a ton of creativity and diverse ideas and various backgrounds and cultural concepts that happen in these communities. And they just simply need the tools to operate more seamlessly. And with the proper tools, they can promote like a thriving economy. So once again, we just want to provide like a transparent infrastructure and tools for these people to use, like almost as a source of community money within their larger ecosystem, for the promotion of autonomous economy. So that's a lot, and Liberty, like it really encapsulates all of the other principles. So I just spent a little bit more time on that. Yeah, I'll now kick it over to Corey, who can talk about censorship resistance.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. And like what Johnny just said, like it's a real strong one, which encapsulates kind of the reasoning behind or necessity behind a lot of the other principles that drive us at Status. So censorship resistance, we enable free flow of information. No content is under surveillance. We abide by the crypto-economic design principle of censorship resistance. Even stronger, Status is an agnostic platform to information. So what does that mean, right? An example of this is public channels serve as aggregators of news for multiple sources, so people can trust that the content in these channels is not being censored by any authoritarian third party. In fact, like why do we do this? Just to start off, like it's important to us that information is freely available to anyone who would like to disperse it or consume it. It's not up to us what people should say, or at least the platform, the base platform, the way in which messages are passed should not be censored in any way. Because we're seeing the results of large organizations who have started out with good intentions, saying we won't be evil, to further and further choose to bypass that original motto or ideal or livelihood and censor certain things that they view or deem unworthy. And we've also seen authoritarian regimes drastically censor information so that they can control the narrative or keep people in the dark in terms of what's going on in the reality outside of them. We don't like this, and we see it more and more every day. And we feel that the underlying platform in which information flows, especially communication between individuals, is completely censorship resistant. Because I've always said it's you can still build a centralized entity on top of a censorship resistant, a censored entity on top of an uncensored one, but you can't go the opposite direction. Once you constrain the information within a system, you can't unconstrain it. And so we make sure that the base layer is something that we really can't control. We can't read messages. We can't censor them. We can't stop them from being propagated across the network. And that's very important to us. So anytime you read something in a public chat, you can be sure that someone isn't keeping it from being there. You, as an individual, may have options to block or censor things yourself, but the underlying platform can't do that for you. And we think that's important. Next slide, please. Can you hear me? Cool. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Carrie, I guess Carrie cut out. Awesome. I love Jitsi. All right. Security is a very strong one in our mind. I guess especially for me, considering I'm the chief security officer. We don't compromise on security when building features. We use state-of-the-art technologies and research new security methods and technologies to make strong security guarantees. Examples of this are information security. We practice preventing unauthorized access, private keys, transactions, end-to-end encryption for all, and other state-of-the-art technology. We use whatever is currently available to us in terms of available security technology to build how this app talks and uses and how communication works. We are a non-custodial platform. We never hold on to your assets for you. All your data is in your control. And in any way that we can, we keep the network from being able to gather that information through strong encryption and obfuscation techniques. We also do a lot of threat modeling, security, bug bounties, audits, constantly trying to do a review of our tools. We're open source so that anyone can view it and submit bugs. And we're always happy to hear ideas from people who may have better ways of doing the things we already do. We're not perfect. We use best practices when they're there. We try to innovate where we can and make sure that the user who's using Status can have stronger guarantees than anywhere else that the data that they put into the application and the network is secure and can't be compromised in any unreasonable fashion. Let's see. How do you want to move on here? Let's go on to the next one, please. I can go on and on about security. And hand in hand with that is privacy. This is also, we believe, is a human right. So just reading it off the list here. Privacy is the power to selectively reveal oneself to the world. For us, it's essential to protect privacy in both communications and transactions, as well as being a pseudo-anonymous platform. Additionally, we strive to provide the right of total anonymity. By giving into surveillance, I've agreed to make myself such a harmless, unthreatening, uninteresting person that I actually don't fear having the government know what it is that I'm doing. It's a quality quote to think about when considering privacy. Why do we do this, or why do we care? We feel we need to provide people with the tools they need to live autonomous, sovereign lives and be confident that their communications, all kinds, including messages and transactions, are secure. That's some on privacy. Sorry, hold on a second. There we go. It's not reading. It's incredibly. We believe it's an important human right to be private, no matter who you are. The goal in all of decentralized technology is to provide you the right tools to disclose yourself how you'd like to in the context of the people you're talking to and communicating with, whether that be messages and communication or value transactions. And no one should be able to extract information from you that you didn't want them to have in the first place. It's the same concept of censorship resistance. You can't get that back once you give it away. Once you have things that constrain your privacy, there's no way to get it back by building on top of it and removing it. And so we feel the base layer needs to be completely private as it possibly can be, so that you can always opt out and conduct yourself the way you think you should. How do we do this? We have anonymous account creation. We don't require your phone number, your email, anything like that in order to start using the application. You create your keys on your mobile app, and you then selectively attest information about yourself to build out your profile. You don't have to, but you can if you want to, and that's an important step. You can have multiple wallet accounts. So we generate the initial wallet, but you can import new ones. You can generate multiple ones so that you're not using the same wallet in every context, which drives a lot of information about what you're doing financially. We'll also actively increase the privacy technology in transactions as it's available and ready to use in production. So we have to make sure it's secure as well as private before we start rolling it out into the application. But we promise to always use what works to increase your privacy and security. Let's see. All chats are end-to-end encrypted, regardless if it's a public chat or not. In the context of private chats, we use additional encryption techniques, standard techniques called like double ratchet. It's the Signal protocol. And we do whatever we can to make sure that as your messages move across the network, no one can pick them up and read them. In fact, we even do so much as use the Whisper network to make sure that it's very difficult to see who's talking to who, so that not only can you not see the message, you don't know who sent it or where it's going. Our browser privacy, lack of analytics and tracking, so we don't track anything in the application. We don't look at what you're doing. We don't try and send user metrics to make sure we can do marketing appropriately. In some cases, we even sometimes shoot ourselves in the foot, ask Johnny, to make sure that we're not extracting information from you that you didn't agree to. So we have to come up with new, unique, innovative methods for marketing so that we uphold these principles because we hold them so sacred. In the future, there's all kinds of things. Metadata protection, zero knowledge snarks, private transactions, you name it. We're looking into it to try and increase all three of these things because they all kind of go hand in hand. And that's it for me.
Cool. Thanks, Corey. Carrie, is your Wi-Fi working? Maybe not. So Carrie's having some connectivity, so I'll take over. But in the meantime, are there any other questions before we move forward? Okay. If not, I'll kick off. I'll take over for Carrie. But yeah, the next. So now, the next principle is transparency. We strive for complete openness and symmetry of information within the organization, and have no border between our core contributors and our community. We're frank about our shortcomings, especially when making short-term trade-offs in service for our long-term goals. So this is really all about just symmetry of information, both from core contributors and non-core contributors to community or ambassadors. And so what does that mean? That means like open source repositories. All of our code is open source on GitHub for anyone to take, to alter, to change, to use as they wish. We use forums like Discuss for open forums, so anyone can jump in and share their ideas. And so all information is in this like repository in this one form for anyone to access. And we try and blur the lines as much as possible between core contributors and the community. Ambassadors, so a lot of people on this call, there's like a really great example of that. We don't want to be the stewards of status. We want status to be accessible and usable to anyone. But in order to do that, information needs to be readily available as well. And I guess on the idea of being open about our shortcomings is once again giving people the information they need to make the decisions for themselves. So recently we produced some work around the privacy aspects of status. There was recently an article written by one of the community members about comparing Telegram to status to Signal. And, we don't want to portray status in a perfect light, right? Because, we don't have push notifications at the moment, and that's a huge problem for people. Our desktop client is in active development, and that, was on pause for development. And we want to be open with people so they can make the decisions for themselves. And this also goes at like the protocol level. So Waku, when we replace Waku for Whisper, there are privacy trade-offs that happen with that protocol. And to disclose that information is just doing people a disservice. Because once again, our long-term goal is to produce a privacy-preserving tool, a censorship-resistant communication tool. And right now, it's not a silver bullet, right? And people need to understand that so they can, A, make decisions for themselves, but also help identify problems and help fix them as well. So the next principle is openness. And this is the software we create is a public good. It's made available via a free and open source license for anyone to share, modify, and benefit from. We believe in permissionless participation. And here, this can be explained in this chart. On the right, you'll see there are excludable resources like food. There's non-excludable and rival like fish in the sea. And then non-excludable, non-rival like air, right? So there's an abundance of it and anyone can access it. And that's what status aims to produce. Kind of it goes hand in hand with transparency, being open with everything. So once again, all of our code is available in open source repositories. We try our best to have symmetry of information in forms like Discuss and in Discord, where anyone can jump in and find what they need to produce what they want. And this goes into the idea of permissionless participation. So anyone's able to participate in the creation of status. If you have an idea, you can propose it, and it should be based on merit, right? If it's a good idea, then it should have traction and people should be behind it. If it's maybe an idea that's specific to your community, maybe your community just supports it. But the fact that you have the ability and the permission to do that is extremely valuable to status. So once again, anyone here, any ambassador, you shouldn't have to ask to make a change to the product. You can fork status and create your own feature. Or if you have an idea for like a campaign or for like a community initiative, you can submit a proposal to Assemble and you can earn funds that way. You don't have to ask permission to do these things. You can just do it. And this has benefits within the organization. There's definitely less coordination, right? If you don't have this centralized figure dictating what you can and can't do, coordination costs are drastically reduced. And the network effect of that is drastically increased. If you have a bunch of motivated people performing actions out of their own will and volition, that's significantly more powerful than one single entity telling people what to do. And this also opens up status and the status network to unique perspectives. Like I'm a 33-year-old white male in New York City. My perspective on things is very different from someone else, from someone like Ken in the Philippines, for example. And bringing this permissionless participation into the network opens up status to various unique perspectives, and that's extremely valuable in itself. And then there's this concept of free culture versus permission culture. And we think that permission culture just doesn't provide as much creativity as a free culture does. If you're open to do what you want, there's going to bring a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge, and a wealth of creative ideas that a permission culture just simply can't. And then decentralization. So this is obviously an important one for the product we're building. We minimize centralization across both the software and the organization itself. In other words, we maximize the number of physical computers composing the network and maximize the number of individuals who have control over the systems we're building. So at a software level, take a look. Status and the infrastructure is a prime example. The protocols we use are peer-to-peer, right? We remove centralized services as much as possible. And the reason for that is centralized choke points are not only costly from like a resource perspective, but then coordination, they create these centralized choke points which lead to security risks, to privacy risks, to potential censorship. So we want to remove the ability to even do that through decentralizing the network and the protocols we use. And in the organization, the long-term goal of status is always to become a DAO. We don't want to be this centralized organization in which the founders or a small group of people are making the decisions that impact everyone else. Decentralized organizations was kind of mentioned on the previous slide is the potential power of a decentralized organization is far greater than that of like a closed source, small centralized group. There are certain benefits of being centralized, efficiency or efficiency and I guess convenience. But in the long term, we're strong believers that decentralization holds much greater potential. And we believe in the network effect of that. In the organization, you can see this in like projects such as Assemble. So we've launched Assemble as like a decentralized funding mechanism for both core contributors, for ambassadors, for anyone. It can almost be seen as like a decentralized Kickstarter, right? And the way we've built that, the way we've architected it, is with this idea of liquid funding, which was introduced by Jordi Baylina at DEF CON 2017, I believe. And there's functions built into the smart contracts that give delegates the power to then delegate money further down the line, right? So from a purely financial perspective or like fund management perspective, you're decentralizing where funds can go, or where funds come from and where they can go. And that's just one example or one step that Status is taking to decentralize the organization. And this is a very hard thing to do. This is like, there's risks associated to it, and to get it right, it has to be really well architected and really well thought out. So I think Assemble is a really good example of the path to decentralizing the organization. And we're also working on, various governance mechanisms. There's a team dedicated to doing that now, and hopefully in the short term, we're going to start to decentralize product feature decisions, right? So people have already come into to discuss or to propose new feature ideas or what they want to see in the product. We're working to formalize that and once again really like have on-chain consequences of people's decisions. And so just jumping back, like in the protocols we're using obviously the Ethereum public blockchain, which is a distributed system. We use Waku for distributed messaging. It's important to note that we do have centralized mail servers, for example. So to say that we are entirely decentralized now is not the case. And then as mentioned, governance and the move towards a DAO is very important. Any questions so far? I know I've been talking for a while. Okay, cool. Well, I'll just go through the rest of these and then we can open it up for discussion. Where are we? Okay. Inclusivity. We believe in fair and widespread access to our software with an emphasis on ease of use. This also extends to social inclusivity, permissionless participation, interoperability, and investing in educational efforts. So, as previously mentioned, we want to build real tools for real people. And that means building stuff that isn't just for, a highly technical group or something that isn't for for developed countries. We want to build tools for anyone of any cultural or technological background to use, to understand and to use. And, when we talk about fair and widespread access, our technology has to work on many devices, including older mobile phones and resource-restricted devices, for example. And that's where Nimbus comes in. It's available in many languages. So Jinho and the ambassadors have done an amazing job in localizing our website and the product itself. And as mentioned, it's not just for first world users. It's built for people of many backgrounds, of many levels of technical understanding. And here it's important to note that access is not a passive thing. So there's kind of like this natural progression, right? People can use it, they can understand it, they can learn about our products, and then they can get involved as they want. And involvement here can mean simply using the product. It can mean getting into GitHub and writing code and submitting PRs. It can be writing a blog post in your local language. Like anyone should be. When we talk about ease of use, once again mentioned before, it's not just for technical users. It's not a threatening or intimidating piece of technology. And I think the way the protocols are designed now and the way I guess the UX of some of these products is, it can be somewhat intimidating. But we work to lower those barriers of entry and make the product as non-threatening as possible. And then also, in terms of ease of use, we need to talk about software compatibility. So it works across multiple devices, and it also doesn't require much technical setup to get started, right? So if you think of like a CLI, for example, those can be fairly complex and not very, end user compatible or end user friendly. So we want to make the software simple and easy to set up, to install, and to run. And when we talk about social inclusivity, this means I guess, encouraging people to participate at any level of their choosing. If you're a developer and you feel comfortable writing code, get into GitHub and submit PRs. If you're a writer, you can contribute to the blog. If you want to host meetups, you can, if you're a community organizer, you can organize your community around a meetup and do it that way. And I think the ambassadors is a really good example of this. There's various working groups that Jinho's helped to set up that allow people to get involved as they wish. And once again, coming back to this concept of permissionless participation, anyone can do it. You don't need to ask permission. And then quickly, when we talk about interoperability, we want to create interfaces that are useful to anyone. Yes, we are part of the Ethereum community, and we want to work well with these projects, but we also are researching and exploring how to get outside that community, how to interoperate with other people to maximize the number of people who are using our software. And once again, we're building an open network for anyone to use. It's just not a closed network. And educational efforts, to be inclusive, we need to share information and educate people on how to get involved. It's that simple. These protocols we're using, once again, and the technology we're building is complex. So it's up to us to educate on how we build things and also why we build things. So that's why we have this principle seminar to teach the philosophy behind status. Moving on, continuance. We create software incentivized to continue to exist and improve without the stewardship of a single entity or any of the current team members. So yeah, I think the goal is to remove status as a central figure in any sense. The network can exist without us, and we need to produce the material, the infrastructure, the architecture to allow that to happen. We're building these tools and infrastructure as a public good designed to last, to change, to be altered. And we want to, ensure and educate people on how to do that and let them know that they can do that. So I think right now we are fairly reliant on status core contributors and obviously status funding. And this is an area where we do need significant improvement in the name of transparency. Yes, we do need to get better at this. And we also need to educate and incentivize people on how to continue status without the stewardship of the status network, both at a philosophical and a financial perspective. I think we can do this through, obviously we do it through open source code, through education, through decentralized governance and tools like Assemble. And then I think that the big step will be distribution of fund management, because once again, the financial incentive to work on status, or rather, where the funds come from, it naturally is from the multi-sig and from a centralized figure, but we need to figure out how to distribute that if continuance is going to be a real thing. All right, and the last one is resourcefulness. We're relentlessly resourceful as we grow and have ready access to capital. It's our obligation to token holders to fight bureaucracy and inefficiency within the organization. This means solving problems in the most effective way possible at lower economic costs in terms of capital, time, and resources. So I guess it's important to note that what we're building is extremely challenging. There's no denying that. These protocols are bleeding edge, and half the time they're in research. So we need to be really smart as to how we approach these problems, these challenges, and how we coordinate around their development. I know, I was watching Oscar's presentation on this from 2 years ago, and it was interesting. He mentioned there is no magic pot of money. Yes, the token sale was provided initial funds, but that, as we now know, is not just this ever-growing pot of funds. We need to be very resourceful and efficient with how we use them. We need to continue trying new things. We need to fail fast and learn from our failures, both in tech and coordination. If something doesn't work, we need to understand it and be resourceful enough to change it. We need to encourage permissionless participation. Once again, the power of a decentralized org is magnitudes larger than that of a centralized organization, both in terms of manpower and resources when you really think about it. Yeah, and as mentioned, financial resources are not endless, and we owe it to token holders to be smart and effective with what we have. It's our duty in the long run. And finally, we need to just continually ask ourselves how we can be more resourceful. How can we improve the product? How can we improve coordination? How can we become more efficient across the network? And this manifests itself both in how we coordinate from an asynchronous communications perspective, right? We're distributed around the world, and how we've organized is it's pretty impressive what we've done so far. So, yeah, and that is that. I know it was just me rambling for a long time, but we've got a few more minutes, and I just wanted to open it up for any comments, questions, any ideas whatsoever.
Don't be shy. Also,
oh, thank God. I thought my microphone wasn't working this whole time.
also, if you have something that comes on later, don't hesitate to ask in status or the community Discord or anywhere, and we're happy to answer those types of questions.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so I have a question regarding the basic principle like privacy and openness. As we discussed openness, which is anybody can actually contribute in the product roadmap and the product development and everything in terms of development as well. So we have seen that we have a project roadmap where we have introduced features which is already in the pipeline, nearly pipeline, push notification. So which is somehow I feel like the another principles which have privacy, which is going to hamper. We have going to introduce Android push notification. So I'm just curious to know what exactly the implementation will be, because in Android the FSM will be FCM will be completely proprietary setup. So I feel like privacy will be a little in concern for me.
So I'll handle this one. Two parts. One, you're exactly right. There's a reason why we don't have push notifications now. We used to. But the requirements that standard push notification implementations have drastically reduce the level of privacy that we currently have within the app without push notifications. So you have to disclose a lot about yourself and who you're talking to and where you're talking from just to have regular push notifications on your phone that you use today. So in that light, we dropped them for the version one release. We currently have a way of doing it natively within the app as a background service for Android, which will be coming in the next release or two. So basically, your Android app will run a background service and then push notifications to you natively within the application without using any servers, right? So there's not using a push notification service. Apple does not allow this, and so we may have to come up with new novel methods for dealing with Apple's more restricted API on how you run applications. But I also wanted to get to something else that you mentioned here, is that in some cases when we release a feature, we may have difficulties arguing about
Test, test. I can hear whoever that was, but no one else.
Yeah, me.
Oh, hey, Chris.
Yeah, I think that we can also mention that sometimes we have this conflict between the principles, but what we may try to do is allow the user to choose. So, of course, we still trying to figure out the push notification that is really important for the users, but yeah, sometimes we don't want to have some things on the wall of chain that would be something like having a server for push notifications, and perhaps if we find a solution for Apple, we might also use that for Android, because it would be more battery wise to not have this service in the background.
Cool.
Hello.
I hear you.
Back.
Okay, cool.
Did we get cut out or did we finish?
Corey, you cut out, but Ricardo, thanks for jumping in.
He said exactly, I heard partially what he said. He said exactly what I was going to say, is that we'll always give the user the option to opt in or out based on situations where we may implement something that steps on a principle.
Yeah. I think it's also important to note, like, we have to come back to transparency there. We always have to present the user with the information available and the option to choose. So yeah. Cool. Any other questions from the community? I know, yeah, we flew through it. So as Corey mentioned, we'll post this recording, and we'll also maybe, yeah, let's create a discuss thread where people can jump in and talk there as well.
Yeah, but there is also some things that we wanted to implement. Like, I think that supporting every blockchain that exists would be a nice thing, but this would also break other principles, because or it will not make the software work properly. So we are doing what we think is the ideal, the working with the best or with the more wide blockchain, because Ethereum is the one we use for smart contracts, and everything can be done there. So that's why we are like not supporting Waves or other blockchains. So we're trying to build something that is coherent to these ecosystems. So we can then achieve interoperability within the same ecosystem.
Well put. I don't hear Johnny, so I'm assuming he got cut out. Why don't we go ahead and wrap this up?
I have a question.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. What's up?
Okay, guys, cool.
Okay.
Stopping the stream. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I keep cutting it out.
Ken, have a question real quick to wrap it up.
Was there another question?
Yep.
Since we're pushing and talking about decentralization, I found out that if you add people in your contacts by using our status mobile, you can add and message him directly without any permission. Maybe we should add a friend request notification as well, because it's our right to accept people or not.
Yeah, we're trying to actively look into the ways we notify the user when certain things happen. There's a lot low-hanging fruit there, I think, in terms of how we disclose like events that happen to the user. Like someone has, added you as a contact versus you adding them back. We already have it in such a way where the app, we're like, you don't disclose information to people that you haven't disclosed already until you add them as a contact. But there's also situations where, for instance, you buy an ENS name. That process of staking S&T and getting a publicly registered name attached to both a wallet address and your chat key already is a public event. You've disclosed a lot of information about yourself. And so you basically sign an agreement in the process of doing that action. And so from there, we can start to kind of allow people to use that information to add more convenience to them getting a hold of you or sending you money because you've already disclosed that information. We'll get better at making sure you understand that when you make those actions, but you have to be aware of what you're doing when you do stuff like that, and we should be able to use that convenience when it's done. And that's kind of a slippery slope. So it's always a constant conversation on how best to do that stuff.
And regarding the contact list, we have plans on implementing a feature called Tribute to Talk that for someone include you as a contact, they have to send you a fee. So that should solve this problem. So you won't be messaged by spam, for example, because this spam would have to pay you to send a message.
Interesting. Thanks.
Great. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, we're just out of time. I want to thank, first of all, everyone who joined, who asked questions, for tuning in. As mentioned before, like each one of these principles, we could host an hour-long webinar, an hour-long conversation on each one. We just done at the time, and we wanted to use this as a refresher. So I'll create a discuss thread and discuss.status.im. I'll post the recording, the slides that we went through, and then I'll also link to all of the seminars that we conducted 2 years ago. So for people who want to, can check them out. And yeah, once again, just thank you everyone who joined. I really appreciate it. And that's it.